We're now talking about masking, using layers, obviously, and I've got some samples set up, some example type of things we can use in this little talk here. Let's get on with it. Uh, let's talk about masking. Okay, what are masks, anyways? Masks essentially allow us to work between layers to blend the two together in different ways. Okay, to get one layer to reveal something on one layer, to conceal something on one layer, whatever. Let's show an example of not using a mask to do simply that. Well, one way you can do that is using the eraser tool, right? I can take an eraser tool with 100% opacity here, and I'll take a hard eraser tool. So I've got the hardness up just so you can see what I'm doing. And if I start to erase on this top mask, I start to show the mask below it, right? The blue mask here starts to show up. So you can see the blue mask below that. And that's using a very brute force, tough way of doing it. I can use the eraser here by turning down the opacity somewhat and cut through with a little less force, okay? And if I turn the opacity way down, I can be much more subtle on what I erase, okay? So yes, the eraser tool can be used and can be used subtly. I can use it with a hard brush or a soft brush, but that actually creates holes in the pixel layer, which are not repairable, if you will. If I went back later and said, yeah, I want to change something, I didn't really like what I did on that particular move there, it's hard for me to do that. There's actually, if I show you turn off the bottom layer, you'll see that there's opacity here. I've cut through, the little hash marks means there's nothing there. I've cut through the layer, I've made holes in this layer, okay? So that's the brute force way of doing what essentially masking does, okay? So let's do it the right way. Go back to my history panel, and we'll start this thing all over again, okay? Okay, back to two layers. As you remember in the layers panel, layers can be moved up and down, so I can move these layers in different orders. I can show the top layer or bottom layer so that it all works like it did within the layers group. So I'm working with a layer, but let's do something different now. We're going to put a mask. Instead of cutting a hole here, we're going to put a mask in here. Masks are these little icons down here below. You can see the little square with a dot in the center. If I click on that mask, it'll add a mask to the layer that I'm on. Now, since I was in the bottom layer, it's not going to do me any good to put a mask on that layer. I want to put a mask on the top layer. The mask that I want to work on is going to be the top layer, and I can do different things with it. This mask won't do anything because it works with the mask, this layer and the mask below. So let's reverse what I did there. I'll take the mask and drag it into the garbage can. So that mask is now deleted. Let's go to the top layer and put the mask there. Okay, there is a mask now. You see there's nothing happened. It's still the same thing. Why? Well, because the mask is white. When you have a white mask, white reveals. Remember this, white reveals and black conceals. So white reveals everything on this layer. Everything on this layer is revealed by white. If I were to change this to black, and how do I do that? Well, if I invert the mask, I can change it to black. The shortcut for invert is Control I. Okay, I. Now it's concealed. The top layer is concealed by the black. If I go to white, the top layer is revealed by the black now. There's another way of doing that reveal and conceal also, and it has to do, first of all, make sure you have this layer selected, so the mask selected, okay, and not the pixel layer. So I've got the mask selected. I can go up to the properties panel here. If you remembered to do this when we talked about it before, the properties panel should be one of the things you've got on your panels over here. So you select the properties panel. You make sure you selected the layers panel. You can also tell it's selected because of this up here. If I were to select the pixel panel, pixel layer, you'll see that up here it shows selected. If I have the layer selected, the pixel layer, you can see the name of the layer is over here, but if I were to pick the mask, the word mask is going to be right over here, and you'll see up above, mask is selected here, okay? I can go, let's say if I have pixel layer selected, okay, I can go to the mask up here. It's still not selected, but if I click here, now it is selected. Okay, so I can select, if I'm selecting the white, the way to cut through to the white, remember white reveals this top layer, black conceals it. I want to conceal part of this top layer. I would paint with a black, okay? So I would use this black over here to paint. All right. So let's do that. I've got black selected here. I'll use a brush, and I'm going to use the same thing we did with our eraser tool, a hard brush, same size, okay? And we will now, using my bracket keys, change the size of the brush a little bit. Let's see, let's get off here. Okay, and now I can cut through. Actually, that looks like a pretty soft brush. What is going on here? Hardness down 0. Opacity 0. Yeah, that's okay. This is not a size. Oh, it says hardness down. I'm sorry. Let's go hardness all the way up. So now I can use this same technique of cutting through, except that I'm using a hard round brush. But you see, instead of putting a hole on the pixel layer, I'm putting a hole in the panel, in the mask. Okay. Now I can see what I've done by clicking on that mask, right? Holding down the Option key and clicking on the mask again, and you can see the mask here. All right. So holding down the Option key, click the mask again to toggle back and forth. If I hit down the Shift key and click on the mask, I can turn the mask on and off. Okay. So now the mask I've been able to cut through, which is very nice. All right. If I refill this mask, here's some more shortcut keys to remember. Depending on the top color here, remember this is the color picker. The default colors are black and white. So if these are not black and white, you hit D. Now it's changed it. It's changed it to white and black. If you want to toggle back and forth, you hit X. Now why is that important? You're going to be using brushes a lot, and they're going to be white and black brushes. So you can toggle back and forth just using the X key here when you're on the brush. So if I want to paint on this same mask now with another black brush, I can do that. If I want to paint with a white brush to erase what I just did here, I can do that. Okay, so now I've got a white brush. I've just erased what I did. I've got a black brush, and I can go over now what I did. So back and forth between white and black, erases and conceals. All right, so now I'm back to concealing this. Now there's brushes in between. I talked about white and black, but what happens if I use a gray brush? Okay, so if I do the color picker and I pick a medium gray. You see gray here, right? And I pick a medium gray color and I paint with the medium gray on that white. What's going to happen, right? Well, it's going to happen something in between. So it's just like I had a window shade, or whatever you want to call it. It gets brighter and darker depending on the color of my brush. If I went to a little darker brush, I would get a different effect. If I went to a little lighter brush, I'll get a different effect up here. So depending on the color of the brush, I can get different effects on the mask. All right, which is pretty neat. There's another way of getting a different effect on the mask. Here's a shortcut to remember. Here, I want to refill this mask here with white. White is my foreground color. So if I hit Option Delete, it'll fill it with my foreground color. Actually, white is not my foreground color, it's gray. All right, so let's go back to foregrounds and backgrounds colors. What was the shortcut key for default was D. So now I'm back in black and white. If I go back to the mask and make sure that I'm on the mask and not the pixel layer, if I do this with the pixel layer, it'll fill this with white. I don't want to do that. I want to do the mask layer. So Option Delete. Now I've got a white mask again. So I'm back to where I began. Okay, on the old history panel here, you can see all the history layer things that we've been doing to it. Okay, so back to white here. You can obviously do different colors with different brushes. You can also change the mask here. If I invert this mask to black, and I go up to the properties panel here, I can change the density of the mask this way. So now I'm down to about a 50% gray again. Okay, you can see down here. So I can change the density of the mask by using this toggle, this switch up above, right? I'll talk about feathering here, okay? And that's about it, and I'll talk about inverting. So if I want to invert, I was using Control-I before, I can also invert this mask by clicking here. So the property panel is pretty important. It gives you a lot of shortcuts, a lot of things you can do with masks and layers. Okay, so we're back to this particular spot here. Let's invert it one more time. Let's do a different thing. We're going to use brushes again, but I'm going to start getting into how to do things subtly. We've been using a hard brush, okay, before. Hardness was all the up. We're going to use a soft brush. We learned that going from black to white, white to black, such as a gradient, for example, if I use the gradient tool here and go across here, you'll notice it goes from white to black, right? It goes from white to black. So this over here conceals this top layer. This over here reveals the top layer and everything in between, right? So so this reveals the top layer, conceals the top layer, and everything in between. We'll do a little Option Delete to fill with white again. So all that shading is important when you're trying to blend things together. I almost never, when I go to brushes, select hardness all the way up. I like to have very soft brushes, okay? And a lot of times large brushes so they can paint with the edge of the brush on something versus the center of the brush. And then I will use opacity and flow to make the effect even more subtle, okay? So if I use a soft brush, you can see the effect is soft on the edges, right? If I want to make the effect even softer, I can change the opacity of the brush down to, let's say, 50% or close to 50%, okay? And then if I keep on brushing back and forth, it builds up eventually to 100%. Okay, that's one way to do that. Or you can use opacity and flow together. So if I use this at 50%, I can take the flow down. So without picking up the brush at all, I can paint back and forth. It's very low flow, and as I go back and forth, it builds up. Eventually, it'll build up to 50%, which is the area here. So using brushes with opacity and flow settings will make your blending a lot more subtle. So that's one of the things to understand. Let's see, linking and unlinking. Okay, let me take this brush. Let me go to 100% opacity, 100% flow, and cut into the hole in here. Okay, we're going to cut a hole in the middle of this thing and show you what this little icon between the mask and the layer means. Okay, that's a link, and these two are linked together. The mask and the layer are linked together. So if I were to move this top layer, I'm selecting the layer. I'm now going to move this layer. You'll see the mask moves with it. Okay, the mask is moving with the layer, but the hole is moving with the layer, right? So you know the mask is moving with the layer. If I were to unlink the two and do the same thing, I've got this the layer selected. I can now move the layer, but the mask stays put. So now the two are independent of each other. So this linking is also important. It's good when you're doing things like skies and stuff. If you got a good mask set up, but you want to change the position of the sky a little bit, you can unlink them and move the sky around. The mask will stay put. Okay. So let's go back and go back to the very beginning on this one, just so I can reset everything. Go back to layers here. Turning mask off and on. Clipping masks I will get into right now, and yeah, that's it. Let's use another example here. Let's use this particular example here. This is a good example of how to use layers. I'm going to use this as showing how to blend using a sky replacement example, and also a clipping mask. First of all, let's just see what a clipping mask is. Okay, if I were to no, we'll do the sky replacement, then I'll do the clipping mask, okay? What I'm going to do is, this is an interesting picture I took in Iceland. I like the foreground. The background is a strange sky with the ripply clouds on it. I could probably fix it up some other ways, but let's use a sky replacement. I want something very dramatic. So I'm going to use this sky here and put it into that last picture, okay? How can I do that? Well, easily, I can take the move tool, click in the middle of this picture somewhere, and drag it up into my Iceland picture, bring it into the picture, and drop it. Okay. Now I want to line this picture up somewhat. This isn't too hard to line up because I can see the horizon there pretty easily. But in places where you can't see exactly where you're going to line it up, one of the tricks I always do is take the layer I'm trying to line up here, take the opacity down a little bit so I can see the background, and then move it into position. Okay, that looks about right. It's a little over the top of the mountains. When I want to, if I want to nudge that up a little bit, I can use the up and down arrow keys, so I can just nudge that up a little bit, and that's probably enough. Okay. Now that I'll go back to opacity 100%. I got the sky where I want it. Obviously, it doesn't look good. If I were to turn off that layer, you can see the line of the sky is too straight there. So how do we get this blended in correctly? Well, there's a lot of, remember the gray to black gradient I used before. So I'm going to go to this top layer here. I'm going to add a mask to it. Okay, I'm going to go to the gradient tool here, and I'm going to put a gradient on this mask from black to white. Okay, so it's going to reveal and conceal the bottom layer. What I'm trying to do is feather this bottom edge here. So I'm going to take a gradient here, very small, and start, whoop, wrong direction. Okay, you can see what I'm doing here. You can start to see the mountains now. You can see the gradient tool. If I put the gradient tool out here further, you can see I can change how it blends together. And every time I can get this, keep on doing that until I get it like I want it. That's too much. I like it about there maybe. No, that's not right. So I keep on doing this until I have it about like I like it. And forget this area, I'll fix that later. So I'm using this gradient here. If I go to option, whoops. If I go to option click, you can see what I've done. I've made a soft edge on the horizon, okay, to blend the two together. So that, and obviously there's still some problems with this thing. If I look at it, I can look at this. It doesn't look too bad here. The mountains are sort of smoky looking back here compared to what they were before. Not too different. It's starting to look okay. Now how can I even blend it better and get rid of some of this over here? Remember we talked about using brushes, and we talked about using soft brushes, and taking the opacity down to something that's really low that allows me to paint in the effect gently. I'll take the flow down something pretty low, and using a black to conceal, because I'm trying to conceal some of these clouds here, the clouds at the top layer. I'm trying to conceal some of these clouds here. I got a very small brush there. I'm going to use a bigger brush using a bracket key. And instead of using the center of the brush to paint, I'm going to use the edge of the brush because that's the softer part of the brush. Okay, so I would just gently paint over what I want to reveal behind it. And I'm doing this slowly because I want this to look as natural as possible. Start to see the mountain there. And now I can start going over a little bit of the horizon and to feather that edge a little bit more until to me it looks like I want it to look. It's obviously a matter of taste, and what you can do is I can make a real big brush and just go over it gently like this. Now I've got that blends in pretty well, I think. I've now got the sky blended in about where I want it. There's one more step I could do to blend this even better, which would be to change the opacity of the sky down a little bit. Okay. Now I want to show you one other kind of mask called a clipping mask. I'll put the opacity back down. Suppose I wanted to use an adjustment on this layer here, but I don't want that adjustment to affect the bottom layer. All right. There's a couple of things I can do. Let's take adjustments up here, and we'll use a curves adjustment. So a curves adjustment is good for adding contrast. I'll give it an S curve here, a little bit up there, a little down here. Now I've made these sky look really contrasty with an S curve, but you see what it's done to the rest of the picture too. If I turn this on and off, this adjustment, see the little eye here, this adjustment, I turn it on, you see the foreground changed also. And maybe I don't want that. Maybe I wanted to leave the foreground the way it was. Okay, the way I do that is create a clipping mask out of this particular adjustment here. What is a clipping mask? A clipping mask says I want to clip this adjustment to the layer right below it. I don't want it to go and hit this layer below that. So how do I do that? There's a little icon here for clipping. So for this adjustment, if I use the clipping icon, you'll see this layer move over one a little bit. So now it says it's clipped to the top layer. See, I'll unclip it. You can see what it did to the foreground change. The sky didn't change at all. Okay, so now I've clipped this adjustment to this adjustment. There's other to the layer right below it. Now another way to do that is using your option key. Remember, option's magical. Going down between the two layers until that little icon appears, and I can clip that. So now it's clipped. So this particular S curve, I can do whatever I want with it, and it only affects the sky, and does not affect the layer below it. I can make that sky as ominous as I want. See, crazy bad, and it doesn't affect the layer below that. It may not look realistic, but that's not the point. I can also adjust that by backing off a little bit on the opacity of that sky. So we've got actually that's doing the opacity of the adjustment, but I can do the opacity of the sky too. So there I've got my sky replaced. It's clipped and everything's good. Let me show you how to use selections to when you're masking. This was pretty easy to do. I could have done this with a selection to use a mask. I just wanted to show you masking and blending. But let me show you another example here, which is my tires example. I want to create these two tires interlocking. First of all, this is the final result of the work I did, but what I'm going to do is take this top layer off and start with this picture of a tire. I want those two tires interlocking. You probably learned in the layers talk that I can create another layer by simply dragging this into the plus, or do Control J, right? If I do Control J, the problem with this approach right now is it copied the entire layer, including the background. So if I were to try to take this layer here and turn it around and reposition this tire, you can't see the tire below it, right? So I don't like that approach. There's a better way of doing that. I wanted this tire but with a transparent background. The easiest way for me to do that then is go to select subject. This magical little tool selects just the tire. Now I've got the background selected. If I do Control J, it does copy the tire, but this time you can see it's got hash marks around it. It's got a transparent layer, a transparent background. So this layer is transparent. If I turn the tire below it off, you can see it's transparent. Okay. Now I can take this top tire, take the move tool, and move it into position. Okay. Now, how does this have to do with masking? Okay, you're asking yourself. Well, pretty good. I want to mask off this top tire. I want to mask off this top tire right through here, so it appears that the other tire is going on top of it versus behind it, like it is now, right? I can do that in several ways. I can click on this. I can click on a mask, right? I can now start using black to conceal this top layer here. So I take a brush, painting black. I'll use the opacity and flow all the way up, and I can start painting a let's see, it's black, and I want to make sure that I've got a hardness is hardness. Yeah, soft brush size, good, good. Okay, so what I've got now is a nice brush here. I can start. I'm sorry. Good. I can start now painting the tire in here, right? The only problem with this technique here, and it works, I mean, if I'm very careful, I can get to what I want to. The tire's starting to get hidden. But as I get to the edge, you can see it's now starting to create a little halo there. That's because it's a soft brush. I could use a harder brush, but boy, do I have to be really careful when I get to the edges, right? I could make the brush smaller, real small. I could get the brush harder, and I could get in there and just around the little edges and everything. I could probably get it blended in to start to look the way I want to look at it. But if I'm smarter, and let's go back and take this mask off, there is another way of doing that. I'm going to put the mask back on here because I need a mask to do this here. I want to create a selection out of this tire here, or this tire here, so that this tire is selected, and I won't be able to paint black outside the selection. As we talked before, selection, whatever's selected is where your adjustments happen or painting happens. What's not selected is protected. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go back to this tire here, go back to select subject. It's now selected this tire, right? So whatever I do with this brush here, I can use any old big brush. as long as I'm on the mask layer. Don't paint on these pixel layers. I'm on the mask itself. Okay. If I paint outside this mask, nothing happens. If I can go around here, you can see nothing's happened on the mask. But as soon as I cross into the selection area, it paints. See that? So now I've got protection. Using the selection, I've got protection here as to where my painting goes. And it's pretty darn good protection. You can even see along the edges here, there's little jumps and bumps where the tire changes. As I get close to here, I'm going to want to get a little bit smaller brush so I don't paint over the other tire, but that's, now I've got that. I can do Control D, deselect, and I've got the tire. I didn't do a real good job right down here, but I got the tire done using a selection to protect what I was doing. Okay. You can do the same thing when you're doing skies and other things. You can make a selection and protect what you're doing. Okay, that's it for this particular workshop at Masked in Photoshop. I hope you enjoyed it. Come back again.